Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. Around this time of year, which is early September, I generally create some leaves. Leaves on the turn, leaves heading from late summer into early autumn, and I just cut a whole bunch of them because I'm gonna end up wanting to use them as accents or maybe as the main focal point in all kinds of things, on tags and journal pages, 3D projects, whatever it might be. So I thought I'd invite you along for that process, and I might let it kind of open out over a couple of videos, just so that I can spend the time doing what I usually do and just invite you along for some of the fun. So obviously, if I want to create background papers for this, the quickest way is going to be with sprays. You can of course use ink pads if that's what you've got. There's no need to run out and buy loads of sprays. If you've got sprays, this is a great way to use them. I've got various paper surfaces, so I've got some old book pages, I've got some various mixed media papers, just some cheap white card, and I've got my usual manila tags. These are basically the same as the Ranger manila tags. Good quality manila paper, smooth surface, but they are ones that I used to buy in bulk from a fantastic online UK independent craft store, which has sadly now gone out of business. So when I finished up the box I'm working through, I'm going to be looking for a new supplier. And I'm gathered a couple of sort of organic-y looking stencils that I might use to add additional texture. But as you'll see from the process, you don't. That's not necessary. That's a refinement. So for once, I think I'm just going to work on my basic underlying craft mat. So I'm going to take away my nice piece of flooring, and you'll see the mucky undermat that is there, because if I spray into the cardboard box I would usually use, it's just going to make it tricky to see what's going on. We'll see. As I play, I'll see what looks best on camera. So come with me and make some autumnal backgrounds. Back in a sec. So this is the splat box that I would quite often do my spraying in, but as I say, that's just quite difficult to achieve on camera, or maybe it's not. The thing is, it casts a shadow, so you can't really see what's happening. So under here is my large, just craft sheet, water resistant craft sheet that covers pretty much all of my desk. And if I'm going to be doing lots of spraying, I might as well just have my whole surface available to do that on. So one of the things I quite like to do is get some of that sort of transitional look. So I've got some green sprays, I've got peeled paint, Shabby shutters, I've got some yellows, I've got wild honey and scattered straw. In fact, I might want a little bit of mowed lawn as well, just to go all the way to original green, as it were. And then I've got greys coming in, pumice stone, hickory smoke. All of these, as usual, will be listed in the descriptions. Then I've got my obvious browns, rusty hinge, vintage photo, gathered twigs, bit of ground espresso. So they're all probably going to come into play. I've also got a couple of bluesier ones, the speckled egg, the weathered wood, and I've got a couple of oxide sprays on standby in case I want to do some flicking with contrary colours, which are often just a good way to get the browns and oranges to show up, is to flick a bit of blue or purple at them. So there's a gathered twigs in there, broken china, speckled egg, tumbled glass in the oxide formulations. And having mentioned purple, I'm sort of a bit tempted to have one of those around as well. Dusty Concord. In any case, it's just a question of spraying. I might put down a little bit of water to start with on this mixed media paper because it's quite absorbent, and I want the ink to be able still to move. So starting out at the greener end of things, across the paper it maybe gets a little browner or even a little yellow. That's my peeled paint going everywhere. I want to soften that a little bit with some water. Soften all of that with some water, in fact. I might head a little bit yellowy at this end. A little bit of the wild honey going into there. So you can see that that's now transitioning into summer. And there's bits of ink going off onto the craft sheet, but because it's a craft sheet, it really doesn't matter. I think I want maybe to soften that mowed lawn up there. It's a little bit much. just getting little dots, little spatters, and you can see what I mean about texture. That's already creating texture. But if I want to, I can just press the stencil down into it, and it's just creating extra little bits of texture across there, a bit like leaf veining, a bit like, yeah, that kind of thing. And then I can, yeah, print that onto here. Let's not waste what we've got. And I'm going to take that on a little journey. Just allowing that to spread out, move around. Might put a little bit more Shabby Shutter. It's a great kind of late summer green. And these inks are going to operate slightly differently on each of these paper surfaces, because the paper surfaces have different absorbencies, different kind of presence. So I can set this to dry on a rack or on some plastic or on a mat or just somewhere else in the room where it's not going to be in my way. If I want to, I can add some little spatters of maybe rusty hinge. It doesn't need shaking, it's not an oxide. So that's going to be just the odd drop of something that's maybe creeping in as an autumnal look. And I think I'm going to let that kind of spread out by itself, do what it needs to do. Maybe a touch of vintage photo in there as well. And you can just see the surface of the paper is wet, so as that ink hits it, it's spreading out. It's creating those dotty, mottled kind of things that happen on leaves at this time of year. You can even do that with water, except I've put my water down somewhere. A little version of the Spritz and Flick will also give you some texture. Grand. So I've got a little place over at the other side of the room where I'm going to put that down to dry. That's enough of that for now. So I'll put that over to dry and we'll do another one. Back in a sec. So let's move on to this one here that I've already put a bit of ink onto. There's some ink on the mat, so I'm just going to pick that up. You can see on the back of this is just some cheap card I picked up that was intended as design paper, but actually I don't really much like using that side of it, but it's great just as white card. Again, I'm going to start with a bit of Shabby Shutters, because that has that beautiful sort of transitional look to it. Maybe a little bit of Wild Honey going on for some almost mapley look leaves on that. And then I think it might be time for the Rusty Hinge, given I've got a sort of maple kind of affair going on there. So let's make this a reddish look. And speaking of red, what we might want to do therefore is perhaps we'll get really bold with something like Crackling Campfire, which is a very red kind of affair. I'm going to let that some water just move that around a little bit, but you can already see on this card the ink is behaving differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing right. It's just different. It's a different look, it's got a different texture to it. Quite enjoying that texture. I like the dribbles and the runs. I could keep this ink on the mat behind and dip into it, but at the moment I just don't want the card to get too wet. But there's some quite dramatic, nice leafy effects going on there. Paper towel is also your friend at this point, because that's putting on some other leafy textures in places. And that might be all I want to do with that one. I think I want a little bit more ink around the edge. Having said that, let's go Scattered Straw. This is not entirely random, but it's also not planned. It's looking at what I've got on the sheet. It's kind of spotting places where I want a bit more texture or I want a bit more fluidity. Water gives me texture. Water gives me fluidity, obviously, and ink gives me texture. But that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to put it over on my drying rack. Back in a sec. So there's another piece of white card just ready to play. Just another piece of A4 random card. Oh, look where I put it down. It's got some colour on already. So let's use that. Going to start from the Rusty Hinge end of things this time, I think. Nice and red. And then maybe take it into some Gathered Twigs and Vintage Photo, so that we are going quite brownish now. This is going to get me some nice mid-brown leaves. In fact, let's not get darker than that just yet, but let's do some of that spattering on of just a bit of oxide texture that I was talking about. So I'm going to just do a couple of little tweaks. I love that's happening right there. Little dots of oxide against the translucent glow of the rusty hinge. And that's one of the joys for me of combining inks and oxides, is you've got your translucent distress inks, and then when you add chalky oxide, it automatically gives you a kind of texture contrast because of those two different finishes. I already like this just exactly as it is. I'm adding a little bit of water spritzing just to let some of that move around a little bit. And of course, adding water also means that the oxide will oxidize. It's water that encourages it to have that sort of chalky look. I think I might do a little bit of dipping in with my spider web. It's not massively kind of obvious, but it's just encouraging those inks to settle in slight patterns. I don't know if you can see that there over in that corner. And since I've got that on there, I am going to print it onto a tag just because I can. And that might be exactly what I want on that tag background. That might be enough for me in terms of an autumnal look. Let's do the other thing I was talking about, which is a little spatter of something contrasting. So this is Speckled Egg Distress Oxide, and I'm just going to add in a couple of dots of that. And there's a magic to that for me of how that bluish dotting both gives me leaves going mouldy, but also makes the red of the rusty hinge really pop. This is probably my favourite so far. So given it's my favourite, I'm going to gear the next few towards a similar kind of look, because this is the one I'm enjoying the most. That's a little bit of extra Vintage Photo going on. And again, just a little soft squeeze gets me a spatter. If you are not getting the kind of spray patterns you want, have a look at your nozzles, clean your nozzles, warm water. When you're using distress ink sprays, the distress spray stain, it's nice to get in a habit of cleaning the nozzle so that you're not leaving wet ink right in the nozzle. But it shouldn't really make too much difference. If you are spraying with the oxides, you do need to make sure that you clean that nozzle, get in the habit of cleaning the nozzles, because the oxide will start to clog up in the nozzle and make it very difficult to spray. I'm in love with that finish that's going on there. So I'm going to pop that down over the other side. You can see there's ink on the mat, so we're going to pick that up when I get back. So all this ink that is on the mat here, because it's a water resistant mat, is still there. It hasn't dried, it hasn't sunk in. If I was doing this over and under paper, all of that ink would have sunk into that, and I'd be able to use that paper. But with this, I've got a bit more choice about what I do. So I've got one of my old book pages, and I'm just going to pick up that ink off the surface. That's already pretty cool. Gives me a beautiful sort of rusty autumnal look. So that's a base that I can come back to in a minute. I might pick some up onto a tag, just because I've got these tags here sitting waiting, so why not? So the ink that is on the mat is quite wet, so I'm getting lovely soft backgrounds. I might add a couple of splotches onto this one where I've got the cobweb. Yeah, quite enjoying that. And let's get one more book page in action to pick up just the last of what's on the mat here. So it's waste not, want not. I could just mop it all up and then use the mop up paper as well in the future. But while I've got all these papers sitting here, I might as well take advantage, and I can go straight in with a bit of ink dotting. So these book pages, when we come to the die cutting section of this video, what I'll probably do is stick these down onto some card, because if I cut leaves straight out of these, they're going to be quite floppy. But I might also want to use them for something else. So at the moment, I'm not sticking them down. I'm just gonna create my backgrounds. I've got several here. I might as well do them simultaneously with maybe a bit of flicking of gathered twigs. Just a couple of ink spots of that. And again, if I give myself a little bit of spritzing, just water, that'll spread those out. Let those go walkabout. And again, it's really just that look of an autumn leaf and what happens as those autumn leaves start to discolour. You get these beautiful kind of textural elements. Let's maybe drop a bit of wild honey onto these. A little bit of spatter. Oh, hello, where are you going? You're the ring from the inside. Not to worry. And maybe a touch of the Shabby shutters onto here, just to have that echo of summer greens. So it's just another way around. Rather than going with a real full-on spray onto these, I'm starting from just small amounts of ink and letting them move around. Again, paper towel is going to be my friend because it's going to give me additional texture, but it's also going to allow me, if the dots are looking too big, to just pick them up a little. I sort of like that. It's quite subtle at the moment, but I might add a little bit more vintage photo. So that's just spritzes of vintage photo. Watch out if you're doing in layers, because now I've got quite a hard line here, which I'm just going to want to soften. Oh, I mean, rusty Hinge is just a magic colour, isn't it? It just has that sense of life about it. Yep, those are looking pretty good to me. Might have just a touch of peeled paint on a couple of these. Oh, so much for a touch. So there, I'm going straight in with the cloth and just knocking that back a little bit. But peeled paint also has a lovely sort of olivey colour to it. I can see that's on the mat there. I'm going to pick up some of that onto here. Just let it mix in. And might grab another tag and just grab some of this ink that is lying around. That's probably enough to be going on with, don't you think, in terms of autumnal backgrounds? So I'm going to let all of those dry wherever they are. Oh, I've just had a thought. I do want some more of this contrasting colour. So let's go speckled egg again, because I'm quite enjoying that. Just going to tap on a little bit of speckled egg. And again, it's that contrasting, unexpected colour that can somehow bring things to life sometimes. Said I was going to do purple, didn't I? Come on then. Dusty Concord, let's have you. So with the oxides, I do need to shake it up. That chalky pigment will have gathered at the foot of the bottle otherwise. I don't think I want much of this. I just want a hint. That's an oxide. And then I might also go with just a little smidge of Wilted Violet, which I do love. Has a little autumnal delight to it. So that's Wilted Violet in the spray stain as opposed to the oxide. Oh, and look how those purples just have a kind of twilight, dusky melancholy to bring to the game. Enjoying that really rather a lot. So I can see in my future there's some more purple to come. I might add a touch just to this. Come on, out you come. Oh, you don't want to, do you? You don't want to be subtle, which means I've got to be subtle for you. A huge spritz of another colour at this point might not be what I'm after, but I will put some water on to let that purple move around. Oh, Ooh, that did a good thing. So yeah, there's just something about sunrise, sunset this time of year. Those little touches of purple can add a kind of magic. I want a bit more rusty hinge up here. So I hope you can tell that I'm looking. I'm not just kind of going, oh, random extra colour. I'm looking at what's on the tags. I'm looking at a thing that I enjoy. If I'm enjoying it, I'll add a bit more of it. If I'm not enjoying it, I'll knock it back a bit. But I'm enjoying those autumnal contrasts in there quite a lot. So I'm going to let these papers dry, and then I'll be back for a little close-up of what we've got so far. And then the next episode, or it might be the one after, we'll do a little bit of die cutting of some of these papers to create a batch of autumn leaves so that I've got those ready for any kind of playing I might be wanting to do. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing those little autumnal colours coming into focus now. Stick around to have a look in close up at some of what we've created today. If you've enjoyed this, do give me a thumbs up, leave any comments or questions down below. And if you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you would join me on this creative journey. Happy crafting all. I'm back with one final thought before I dive in for my close-ups. As these have been drying, I've been looking at them, and on a couple of them I've just added some extra spatters. So a couple of extra spatters of broken china, of speckled egg, and again that's just about seeing what's going on and just fancying some more texture really. But one of the things that I do also like to do, and I thought it would be only fair to show you that that's what I've done before I zoom in for it, is to do some spattering in a slightly different way. So not direct off the nozzle this time, but that's a little bit of vintage photo. This is a little bit of rusty hinge down onto the craft mat itself. And then with my very scabby splatter brush, oh, look at those inky fingers. Definitely the sign of a good time. This is just a scrabby old craft brush that got left in a water jar and splayed out and is in really terrible condition. But that makes it perfect for a little bit of inky spatter like so. So this is the Mowed Lawn Peeled Paint Shabby Shatter piece of mixed media paper that I've just cut in half just to make it more manageable in terms of size. And yeah, it's had some extra spatters of vintage photo. It's had some extra spatters of broken china. So the vintage photo was sprayed. The broken china came off the edge of the nozzle like I've been showing you, and I'm just adding these additional spatters with the brush, so you can see that gives me additional texture just going onto there. There's another mop-up tag that you missed, so I can do a similar thing, mix in some Distress Oxide into what I've got on the mat here, maybe a bit of that, see, and I didn't do the thing I told you must do, which is wipe the nozzle, and maybe a little bit of the weathered, no, speckled egg it is. So speckled egg down onto the mat as well, wiping that on my paper. And again, I'm just going to grab a little bit of water and I'm going to put that direct onto my mat here. So you can see I've got a whole new colour that I've just created by just mixing on the mat. Some distress inks, some distress oxides. I've got this beautiful kind of purpley grey tone, which I now want on everything. I want it on this one, which was the big one. I haven't cut in half yet. Let's have a little bit of that going on. And let's have it on this one here, just to use up what's on the mat, because I think that's a grand colour. And it's got the chalky opacity, obviously, of the Distress Oxides. And it's just giving me a lovely additional variation. That's speckled egg, and I do just want a couple of splats of that onto this tag, maybe a couple of splats of that there. So you can see it's a question of looking. If you're not satisfied with what you've got, the joy of mixed media is you can always add another layer. You can keep going until you've got something that really does make you happy. So looking at, oh, maybe this slightly dull book page or this cobwebby one. I've still got ink on the mat. I can pick some of it up and put it direct on the tag. Right, now I really am ready to let these do some drying, and I'll be back to show you close-ups of what they are. I've been doing a little bit of work with the heat tool and taking that opportunity to see what's going on and add things. So adding inks when the surface is still wet will create one kind of effect. Adding more ink once the surface is dry will give you a different kind of effect. And my best piece of advice that I can give you is experiment, play yourself, because it really is by doing that you discover and really learn in your bones what it is that is possible in terms of creating layers and spatters and speckles. Time for some close-ups. I'll leave you in peace. Happy crafting all.